Welcome to the Kit Car History File series, where we'll be going through the industry's past. We'll be visiting old marks of long ago, some modern ones, some mostly older stuff. A lot of archive information with photographs and information on the cars they made, the people involved, and what happened to them. Welcome to the Total Kit Car YouTube channel. My name's Steve Holt, editor at TKC Mag and TotalKitCar.com, for another episode of our Total Kit Car History File series in association with Enwind Motors. Interesting one this time. We're going to be talking about Caterham cars. Now, not Caterham 7. Most people, I guess inevitably in 30 years time we might do a video on the Caterham 7. Not that a great car though it is, but we all kind of know what a Caterham 7 is. And if I did a roundup of all the Caterham 7 models that have been produced in the last God knows how many years, since 1973, I think this one might be a 58 parter and it might last 2 hours each video. So we're not going to do that. We're going to look at what I think is quite an interesting subject though. We're going to look at the history of Caterham cars, which is worthy of a quick video in its own right. This isn't a light video, it's going to be a standard length one. Quick bit of background. Obviously the Lotus 7, the name implies it was created by Lotus Cars. Caterham cars became concessionaires for that, and at times were sole concessionaires. They also had the concession to sell new cars taken away from them a couple of times as well, at least once I think, maybe twice, and which time they concentrated on servicing and repairs and accident damage stuff. At various times they also sold Lotus Elans, but I think primarily they concentrated on the 7. When Colin Chapman decided that enough was enough with the 7 and he wanted to become a, inverted commas, proper car manufacturer, Caterham Cars' Graham Nern was in exactly the right place. In fact, he'd been working on trying to buy the model because he'd got wind that Colin Chapman was blowing hot and cold on it, and he'd changed his mind and all the rest of it. But he was in pole position when and worked closely with Graham Arnold, who was then a director at Lotus, marketing and sales and such like. But let's wind it all the way back. 1959, when Purley, that's in Surrey, just to the south of Croydon, rugby club members, Graham Nern, Ian Smith, Nick Carter and Alex Bromley, over a couple of beers no doubt, decided they'd like to start a company that was involved with cars. And they would like to call it Caterham Car Sales and Coachworks. Nern we know about. Nick Carter and Alex Bromley we don't know very much about at all, and indeed they departed the scene fairly quickly. But let's look at Ian Smith. Now he's a very interesting character, a good friend of Colin Chapman, an author, and later on probably the man that founded what became Autosport, really, the Autosport show, when it was called the Racing Car Show, when he was a committee member of the BRSCC. And later I think he was chairman of that. He's a very interesting character, Ian Smith, and a very good writer. I'm not sure what his exact day job was, but I think it was involved with media and writing. But they got themselves a little workshop up on Caterham on the Hill. Now, if you don't know the Surrey area, and so East Surrey area, there's actually two Caterhams. There's Caterham on the Hill and Caterham Valley. Two distinct. They're not towns really. I suppose as a whole they are. I guess it's a bit like Dallas Fort Worth or Budapest. They're actually two towns forming one, although I think both of those have got rivers going through them. There's no river separating Caterham on the Hill and Caterham Valley apart from a very big steep hill. Anyway, that workshop was once occupied by Sir Malcolm Campbell, no less, and then later on Tony Crook, who became the owner of Bristol Cars, but at that time was a racing driver, bought and sold racing cars, and indeed was an Arbath. I think he might have been the first Arbath. I know he was the first Arbath dealer before Radbourne Racing got involved and really put Arbath on the map in the UK. But anyway, Graham Bradshaw Nern was born in Catford in South London, September the 20th, 1933. His family had moved to the leafy Purley area because he went to Purley Grammar School, did his national service in the army, but then he got involved with the family's timber business. As I said, there was a gang of four who founded Caterham, what we know as Caterham Cars these days, Caterham Car Sales and Coach Works. Now, again, Ian Smith comes into it. He wrote the book, The Lotus, the first 10 years. Now, as I said, he was a good friend of Colin Chapman's, and he got wind that Colin Chapman was looking for agents, or dealers as we call them these days, for Lotus, and he put forward the idea that the fledgling little company in Caterham could be a dealer. And indeed, he got that deal, and they were appointed agents for the Severn and the Lotus Elan, and it grew quite quickly. As I mentioned earlier as well, Bromley and Holmes left fairly quickly. Later followed by the ambitious Smith, who had other fish to fry, obviously, and so left Nern in sole control of the business. In addition, I think again people say that all the eggs were in the Lotus basket. They weren't. They bought and sold other sports cars at that time, particularly Austin Healey Sprites and Midgets. And they also, at various times, were agents for other specialist marques, such as Gilban, Marcos and TVR, and also agents for Pico exhaust as well. Graham also, and again, a lot of people don't know this or just don't know this. So Graham had a car sales showroom in the leafy and well-heeled Fortis Green part of North London, which is interesting as well. And it was that building. In that building, it was where ex-Lotus mechanic and Hillman engine expert Willie Griffiths was based, and it was later taken over by Roger Nathan. And in later years, these things all have a habit of intertwining into each other. It was a branch of Paul Michael's Hexagon Motors car sales outlet. So, young Nern, enthusiastic Nern, company going places. He ran a series of whole-page inside front cover adverts in Motorsport magazine every month, and that was a perfect avenue for pre-internet Britain. Motorsport standing at that time was considerable. Good publication, though, it still is, and it was easy for Nern to reach his target audience. The first hiccup he had with Lotus was in '62, when Lotus cut their dealer network and started selling cars direct from the factory, which was a logical thing for them to do, but the hand that fed cut off the food, and it a lot of problems for companies like Caterham. However, Graham was undeterred because he got himself a good footing, a good base point to work from, and he had a great reputation, and that's where he switched to buying and selling second-hand Sevens and Elans, because people forget that as well. And he continued to maintain service and restore them. In many ways, other than a brand new brand new Lotus 7 being ordered, it was business as usual. Excuse me. Even if an owner, and it was good, such was his standing, that even if an owner hadn't bought that 7 from Caterham Car Sales, there was a good chance they'd go there for their spare parts. It became very quickly the place to go for anything Lotus 7. And indeed, the subheading for the company was the 7 Centre, which does appear on some of their early adverts, actually. So that's another interesting little pointer. The coach works as well was an interesting part. They had a coach works. They had crash repair business for production cars. And in that, at various times of hardship, the coach works business would often bail out the car sales business. Such was the sort of cutthroat nature and the delicacy, if you will, of the economy at that time. Always wanted to see an opening. Graham always was very sharp in terms of looking for angles. And he spoke to Colin Chapman face to face at the Racing Car Show in January '66, and he inquired then because he felt that he'd be really well placed to take over the 7, and he inquired about the future plans for the model, and it was clear that even then Chapman had begun to fall out of love with the little car, and he told Nern that he wasn't sure what he was going to do with it, but he would keep him in mind if he decided to get rid of it. And this was just after the company had moved from Cheshunt to their current base in Hethel in Norfolk. So quite a few things were up in the air then. Anyway, undeterred and didn't take no for an answer, Graham sought out the then new Lotus Components boss, because Lotus Components were the ones that sold the kits. And boss at that time, David Lazenby, to try and find out what was really going on. And he was told that since the move, Lotus had actually recommenced production of the 7, and they were extremely but they were extremely busy building all the Team Lotus cars. That's the other thing. That again, Lotus was divided into several little chunks. Lotus Components, as I say, handled the kits, and Lotus 7, and all the racing cars other than Formula One they built. So every time they were busy building racing cars, the 7 got squeezed, really, I suppose. And they, at that time, they were selling quite a few of the Lotus Type 51, which is a Formula Ford car that had appeared first in 1967. So I think whenever they got busy on racing cars and such like, they downed tools on the 7 and just put it to the side, which is why sometimes supply could be quite hit and miss, really, I think. And Graham was also tipped off by Lazenby that Lotus had sufficient components in stock at Hethel to just about be able to build 20 complete 7s, which the Series 2 as it was then. When Lazenby told him that if he could sell that surplus stock, Lotus would continue to produce the car. So what did Graham do? What would you have done if you were Graham and you were kind of not reliant, not dependent, but you were very interested and passionate about the 7? He bought the lot, which was good. Acted as a double edge, really, because it reassured Colin Chapman that there was a demand for the car, even though Graham had bought them all himself. And it kind of reinvigorated him, and so he became interested in the 7 for a time again. So it backfired on Graham, because I think his plan was to buy it there and then, but it just spurred Chapman on. But I don't think Graham really bothered too much, because he just wanted the 7 to continue in production. I remember Graham. I knew Graham quite well, and I always loved talking to him. And he always told me he didn't like surprises. And he knew that deal, even though he'd done that deal, he knew that there could be a few surprises lurking within that. And he took a hands-on approach on this one, and he personally travelled to Norfolk to look at to go through the inventory and to see exactly what was there, and to make sure that actually what Lazenby had told him, and there were enough parts to make 20 complete 7s, was actually true. And he just wanted to make sure all the parts were there. Interestingly, about the car sales and the coachworks, Graham had some magnetic banners, advertising, we call it letter write, but he had them on magnetic boards. So when he was on, or when that Works Land Rover, I think, was on Caterham Coachworks business, they were double-sided, by the way. So it would have, very often, so it was on Coachworks business. When it was on Caterham Cars business, he'd turn them around and stick them on, put that side of the bit to advertise that if he was towing a 7 or something. I also think that sometimes he had one on one side of the car and another on the other side. It was called quite mix and match, really. Really quite clever. Another boost for the little 7 came with the 7's appearance in The Prisoner TV series, starring the actor, the well-known actor Patrick McGoohan. The deal for this, there was 2 actually, I think, supplied, even though one, it just aided continuity. Lotus, it all said Lotus supplied the cars. I think Caterham supplied at least one of them. And Graham himself took the car there and was used as an extra. making an on-screen appearance, I think, as McGowan's driver. And indeed, that appearance, that was the start of a long friendship with Patrick McGowan, lifelong friendship. 1968, David Lazenby left Lotus Components to set up Hawk Racing Cars. That's Hawk with an E, and Mike Warner took his place. And he had to get up to speed with things that were going on, and also to get an idea on exactly how the relationship with Graham Nern worked. Warner and Nern did get on well. But certain things I think he found were surprising for Graham. And I think he was surprised to learn that they lost money on everyone sold. It was seen as just a way, I think, sometimes by Lotus to just generate some hard cash, really. Warner was, I think, quite a diligent guy. It became apparent in the early 70s that development costs were far higher than they expected, which actually cost Warner his job, I believe. But it did give Graham another of the opportunities he liked, and so he decided to press Colin Chapman once more to see if he could take over the whole 7 project. This time, it didn't fall on deaf ears. He'd been visited by another Lotus part of the management team, John Berry, who Chapman had sent down to Caterham with the intention of selling Graham a batch of Lotus 51 Formula Fords that were in storage in a barn in Hethel. Graham being Graham, he spotted a chance and used the 51s as a bit of a lever. And he took a punt, and he reckoned that he had a great chance to shift those Formula Fords, which he did. Didn't take him long either. But he agreed to take them if he could take over the 7 project, lock, stock and barrel. And after long consideration of that offer, Chapman agreed, and agreed that it would make sense to do so, because that batch of 51s was hard cash. And he tasked his finance director, Fred Bushell, to actually thrash out a deal with Graham. As I said, it was good for Lotus as it would bring them much needed cash, while for Caterham Cars and sales and coachworks it was a logical step. Big one though. And as Graham said in subsequent years, it was a big step, bigger than he actually anticipated, to be changed from an agent to a manufacturer. And I don't think that helped. Someone at Lotus had lost all the all the parts numbers and records on file, and all the records pertaining to the 7, I think, which made it very, very difficult for Caterham to, well, I think initially to even be able to build their own car. There was certainly a lot of trucks turning up at moving from Hethel to Caterham over a period of a couple of weeks, and I think what Lotus had told them was that they had certain parts, and then it turned out they didn't have certain parts, but they had stocks of other parts that Caterham were unknowing about, and it was just generally difficult. And of course, it should be said that Lotus had a network of engineering companies almost on tap. Whatever they couldn't do in house, they had close by, at close hands, at close quarters, should I say, an engineering company that could produce the parts quickly and cheaply, that whatever they needed. As Caterham found out, they didn't need the big quantities that Lotus did. So therefore, if they asked for a batch of 10, 50, even 100 of a certain component, when an engineering company would be looking for 1,000 or 2,000 minimum, Caterham Cars were faced with incredibly high prices, or the companies just weren't interested in dealing in small numbers. So they had to get around that, which again put a strain on things at Caterham. As it was, there was real sort of space was at a real premium at Caterham on the Hill. I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of it. There was a little petrol station out front, and there was a collection of what I suppose we could call them sheds, which served as workshop, showroom, parts store. The coachworks had their own shed, and space was at a premium to store the stuff that they really needed. It was, as I said, it was a big difference between fixing, servicing, and selling sevens to actually making them. They did extend what was called the Town End site up on the hill. Much of the footprint did remain the same, but Graham rented an old boatyard site close to his base, and also managed to rent as many lock-up garages as he could find in Caterham. But the financial strain was considerable. And 1973, of course, wasn't a good year for the economy. What with 3-day weeks, strikes, power cuts, and the sports car market was particularly badly hit as a result of what was seen as a luxury. We weren't going to talk about the car itself, but we should really. Graham took over the 7. The S3, Series 3 version of the 7. Of course he took over the 7, you idiot, Steve. But quickly, David Wakefield was a nice guy and a really very important name in the history of Caterham cars. Became a co-director. Pretty nice chap. Initially, he was in charge of Coachworks. That was his side, but he became increasingly more involved with the car sales business. And indeed, the Coachworks was squeezed out after a few years. So it was his idea to revisit the Series 3. So he came up with another plan to... he ran a couple of adverts, I seem to remember, that was something along the lines of we've got enough parts to build. Did the Caterham, a Lotus trick really. Said they had a special edition they were going to make. They had enough to make, I think, 20 cars of the old Series 3 model. First come, first served. Job's a good one. Anyway, they were knocked out, literally overwhelmed with response to that, and it didn't take long before they decided to revert to the Series 3. And pretty much the Caterham 7 that we know and love today. But that's talking about the cars. So there we go. But anyway, value-added tax came in on April the 1st, 1973, and definitely wasn't a joke. That hit the kit car market particularly very hard, as it replaced purchase tax, which had been running since October 1940. And VAT, as it soon became known, was set at just 10%, applied at the point of manufacture, whereas there were different rates of purchase tax that were applied on the wholesale price, and they varied between 13, 22, 36 and 55%, depending on how, for want of a better word, luxurious the item was. But the introduction of VAT was enough, however, for the likes of Gilban, TVR and indeed Lotus to cease offering their products in kit form, as there was no benefit. And add to this the fact that Triumph, MG, Jensen had stopped making sports cars in 73, and you can see it was a tricky marketplace in the UK. However, I think we should all admire Graham's bravery. He stuck at it. Helped greatly by David Wakefield. 7 House is what the main building at Town End was called, and it might well have sounded more substantial than it actually was. The building itself was no more than a converted 2-up, 2-down Edwardian house that was, being honest, always in need of a lick of paint and a general spruce up. The showroom was upstairs, interestingly, with the workshop and parts department out back. Graham's office was upstairs, as was accounts, and such was the constraints of space that when Arch Motor delivered the chassis, they had to be lined up against a rickety old fence at the mercy of the elements, really, until they were needed for production. That continued right through to the opening of the Dartford factory in 1987. Official handover of the 7 from Lotus to Caterham took place at the marvellous Pub Lotus which was an old Bass Charrington pub, formerly known as the Chalk Farm Tavern, that Graham Arnold had decided that would be a great place, a great idea to have a Lotus themed pub. And there was all manner of stuff on the walls, steering wheels, all sorts of things. We may well do a little video on Pub Lotus, indeed, in a future episode. Maybe do a History File Light on that. December the 15th was the day that pub opened in 1970. And Wheelbase, which was sort of a forerunner of Top Gear, did a live broadcast from it, which was amazing, on BBC One. Situated, for reference, at the corner of Regent's Park Road in Primrose Hill. Oh, actually, I think it's really Chalk Farm, but much like Caterham, say, their factories in Dartford, I think technically it's Crayford, but Dartford sounds a bit posher, in Mrs. Bouquet's terms, than Crayford. So it followed that. So I think it follows with Primrose Hill. Excuse me. The site itself. Anyway, yeah, we shouldn't be really talking about Pub Lotus here, really. We'll come back to that. But I remember talking to Graham about the handover, and he was quite downbeat about it. He said that, in his opinion, most of the press that were invited were there just to enjoy the beer and the Skittles and the sandwiches, and it's denoted by the fact that as soon as the official speeches were done, they all tore off without really taking the opportunity to interview Graham or indeed Colin Chapman. And I always found that quite sort of poignant, really. Caterham itself. Caterham Cars, they moved to an old Vauxhall dealership. They switched from one Caterham to the other. They went down to the valley, almost next door to Caterham Valley Railway Station, the end of the line, as it were, there. And they stayed there for many years. They grew sufficiently to open as the factory in Crayford, controversial, Dartford, 1987, where the cars were built, so it took away the strain that they quickly outgrew the Vauxhall dealership. So the Vauxhall dealership, actually, there's a second-hand new showroom, second-hand car sales and servicing, and all the building work was car building work was done at Dartford. I'm going to resist saying Crayford because it just winds people at Caterham up if you say that, and I don't mean to do that because they're really good folk and I get on well with them, so I don't want to wind them up. Anyway, so that's sort of the early history of Caterham Cars. Nern family sold out to I think it was a venture capitalist called Corven in 2007, was it? I think, from memory, when Ansar Ali took over. Before that, Simon Nern had sort of taken over from his father Graham when he retired, and ran the company for several years. Ansar took over, and it was pretty much the same. Ansar made a few changes. He went away from one man, one car on the production side of things, and he introduced shall we say, a proper production line. He oversaw the launch of the CSR range. He saw a period of great growth, actually, for Caterham. And then when Tony Fernandez, who and his business partner, acquired the brands, they were running AirAsia, they were running Queen's Park Rangers Football Club, and they were heavily involved, or got involved, in Formula One. And at that time, Caterham suddenly had an F1 team. They had other bases, I think one in Norfolk, one at Leafield. They had Mike Gascoigne on board as part of the Formula One team. He's a very well-known engineer in Formula One. And I think they had a GP2 motorcycle race team. They had a Caterham Bikes. They had Caterham Composites. It suddenly grew to a very big operation. Interestingly, I don't think the I always thought that the sort of association with F1 and the massive, huge viewing figures that Formula One gets on TV would see Caterham sales go from what 600 to 60,000, but it didn't materialise, and sales didn't really change that much. Obviously, it helped the brand, and it is a great brand, and well, what a fantastic car. But they also moved away from Caterham, which that caused a lot of controversy with a lot of purists who really hated the idea. The town of Caterham didn't much like it either, but as Caterham Cars pointed out, the lease on the building had run out. So they moved down to Crawley, which is over the border into West Sussex, about 17 miles away, I think. Initially, I think as a stopgap, they moved into what I think it was people say it was an old plum-based shop. I don't think it was that, but it was certainly on a pretty nondescript industrial estate for a time while they took stock. And then they moved to a very nice facility, a large facility over on the industrial estate, which is actually right sort of parallel with the runway at Gatwick. So even though it's classed as Crawley, it was the Gatwick runway that they were very close to. Stayed there for several years, and in fact that building only closed in September 2023. They obviously new sales there, a huge stock of second-hand Caterham 7s and other models that have come along, like the 21 and such like. You'd find them there. And they also did a lot of servicing work there. And indeed, when sales for export models became very buoyant, sort of 21, 22, they used part of the Caterham Crawley facility as an overflow satellite build centre. So they were building cars there as well. And what was really cool about that was, I can't remember which way round it was. If they were building UK, I think they were building UK cars, and Dartford, don't mention Crayford, was doing the export stuff. And the beautiful thing about, and I really liked it at the Crawley build site, was that they put up viewing areas so that they couldn't do that. They couldn't do that at Dartford because it was a fully industrial factory. But you could sit and have a cup of coffee and watch a couple of guys building your Caterham 7 with your name on it on the trolley. And I thought that was fantastic, and people loved that. Around about sort of reason it closed in 2023, Caterham changed the way they operated. You can't actually, I don't think, buy a 7 from Caterham directly anymore. They'd appointed a set of strategically placed agents around the country, including marvellous chopper builders, Crazy Horse, and they are responsible for the new car sales. Caterham have now moved into, it's on the same street, I believe. Haven't been there at the time of recording this in June 2024. Haven't been there. They've doubled the size of that factory to a magnificent, and the photograph accompanying this video, and it can only be, the only word I can use is magnificent new factory in Dartford, Crayford. 20,000 square foot, I think, on 2 floors. And it's just come on stream at the end of May 2024. Looking forward to going there. And that kind of brings us up to date. Oh, sorry, I forgot the change of ownership. Change of ownership came along in about 2019, I think, 2019. I honestly, I can't find the piece of the notes there applying to that piece, so you have to forgive me. Relatively recently, their hitherto Japanese importer bought the company. So they are now manufacturers, much like Graham Nern was, I suppose, when he was agent for Lotus. The importer or the agent has bought the company, and they've got big plans indeed. That the amalgamation of the 2 factories was one, and the change of the way they trade. But judging by the photograph we've put up here, you can see, crikey, business must be good at Caterham, because you can see all manner of cars under build, and I think that's incredibly reassuring. As someone that's passionate about the specialist car industry, and ever since I was involved, the first specialist car I ever drove was a Caterham twin cam Super Sports. it's close to my heart, and I'm very passionate about the Mark. And I find that factory, the site of that, I haven't been there yet, but the photograph of that new factory I find incredibly reassuring. And yeah, all that sort of stuff. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this video and you got this far, please consider giving us a click on the old like button. And if you haven't subscribed yet, and you please do so, because it does help the channel, and it really does encourage us to carry on doing what we're doing. Because I'm delighted to say, at the time of writing, I think the subs up to 1,060, which is 1,000 more than I ever thought would be possible when I tentatively started doing these voiceovers. Almost 1 year ago, in about June or July 2023, in fact. So thank you if you've already subscribed. It means so much. So I can't thank you enough. If you haven't, I think at least 70% of people that view these videos don't subscribe. So we need to address that. So please, 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 please click that subscribe button if you will. Wherever you are in the world, thanks for giving us a chunk of your day, all 36 odd minutes of it, and I really appreciate that. Wherever you are, as I said, thanks for visiting. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I really look forward to welcoming you to the channel again very soon. Thank you.